There is a pattern in the human brain that appears again and again in the most dangerous people who have ever lived. It is not a birth defect you can see. It is not a disease you can test for. It is a specific combination of neurological wiring and childhood damage that creates something the rest of us cannot comprehend. A mind that looks at another human being and sees only an object, a tool, a means to an end. This pattern has a name, and understanding it might be the only way to stop the next one. Welcome to Mystery Mind. Today we are descending into the darkest corners of human psychology to understand how serial killers are made, not born. We will examine the brain abnormalities that mark them, the childhood traumas that shape them, and the chilling patterns that allow them to hide in plain sight. By the end of this video, you will understand the psychology of predation at a level that may disturb you more than any crime scene photograph. Because the most terrifying truth is not what these individuals do. It is how much they resemble the rest of us. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a serial killer is someone who murders 3 or more people over a period of time, with cooling-off periods between each crime. This distinguishes them from mass killers, who kill multiple people in a single event, and spree killers, who murder in multiple locations without a cooling-off period. The term serial killer itself is relatively modern, coined in the 1970s, but the phenomenon is ancient. What makes these cases so fascinating to the public is not only the horror of the crimes, but the psychological mystery they represent. How can someone look human, act human, even appear charming and normal, yet commit acts of incomprehensible cruelty? The answer lies deep within the complex interplay between biology, psychology, and environment that shapes human behavior. Understanding this is not mere academic curiosity. It is crucial for prevention, detection, and the protection of potential future victims. To understand serial killers, we must first acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. They are not born as monsters in any supernatural sense. They are human beings whose development went catastrophically wrong. The question that has haunted criminologists, psychologists, and neuroscientists for decades is whether serial killers are created by their biology or their environment, nature versus nurture. The answer, as research increasingly shows, is both, working in terrible synergy. Let us start with childhood, because that is almost always where the story begins. When researchers examine the backgrounds of known serial killers, certain patterns emerge with unsettling consistency. A significant percentage experience severe childhood abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional. Many witness domestic violence or experience profound neglect. These are not merely sad statistics. They are crucial developmental disruptions that fundamentally alter how the brain processes emotion, forms bonds, and responds to others. The human brain develops its capacity for empathy and emotional regulation primarily during childhood. When a child experiences severe trauma during these critical developmental windows, it can disrupt the formation of normal emotional bonds. Psychologists call this attachment disorder, and it manifests as an inability to form genuine emotional connections with others. Without this fundamental human capacity, other people become objects rather than beings worthy of compassion. This does not excuse violent behavior, but it helps explain the emotional coldness that characterizes many serial offenders. But trauma alone does not create a serial killer. Millions of people endure terrible childhoods without becoming violent criminals. This is where biology enters the picture. Recent neurological research has revealed that many serial killers show abnormalities in specific brain regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for impulse control, planning, and understanding consequences. The amygdala processes emotions, particularly fear and empathy. When these regions do not function properly, whether due to genetic factors, brain injury, or developmental problems, the result can be someone who lacks both the emotional brakes that prevent violence and the planning capacity that makes repeated crime possible. There is also evidence of neurochemical differences. Some serial killers show abnormal levels of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, which regulates mood and impulse control, or elevated levels of testosterone associated with aggression. Again, these biological factors alone do not create killers. Many people share similar neurological profiles without ever becoming violent. But when combined with severe environmental stressors and a lack of positive interventions, they can contribute to a dangerous psychological profile. The McDonald triad, proposed in the 1960s, suggested that 3 childhood behaviors predict future violent behavior: bedwetting beyond an appropriate age, fire setting, and cruelty to animals. While this triad has been somewhat disputed in more recent research and is not as predictive as once believed, the underlying principle remains valid. Childhood behavior often signals deeper psychological disturbances. Cruelty to animals in particular represents a troubling inability to empathize with suffering and a willingness to inflict pain for emotional gratification, traits that later manifest in violence against humans. What emerges from this research is a profile not of inevitability, but of risk factors. Serial killers typically result from a perfect storm: biological vulnerabilities, severe childhood trauma, a lack of positive bonds or interventions, and often a triggering stressor in early adulthood that sets off the first violent act. Understanding this complex causation helps us move beyond simplistic narratives of pure evil toward a more nuanced and useful understanding of how these individuals develop. Now that we understand how serial killers may develop, let us explore how they think and operate. This is where we enter truly disturbing territory, because the psychological mechanisms driving serial murder reveal capacities of the human mind that most of us would prefer to believe do not exist. Serial killers generally fall into 2 broad psychological categories: organized and disorganized. Organized killers are methodical planners. They are often intelligent, socially competent, and capable of maintaining outwardly normal lives. They select victims carefully, control crime scenes meticulously, and may follow their cases in the media. Ted Bundy is a classic example: charming, educated, and deliberate. Disorganized killers, by contrast, act more impulsively. Their crimes show less planning, more chaotic crime scenes, and they often live in social isolation. They may live near their crime scenes and leave more physical evidence behind. Most real cases fall somewhere on a spectrum between these 2 poles. What both types share is a profound disconnect between their inner psychological world and the social norms that govern behavior for most people. Central to understanding serial killers is the concept of the homicidal fantasy. Research shows that many serial killers engage in elaborate violent fantasies long before committing any crime. These fantasies often begin in adolescence and become increasingly detailed and consuming over time. They serve as psychological rehearsals, allowing the individual to mentally refine and perfect scenarios of control and violence. When the fantasy eventually overrides the inhibitions that would stop most people, the transition to actual violence occurs. This fantasy life also explains the ritualistic nature of many serial crimes. Killers often try to recreate the perfect version of their fantasy with each victim. This compulsion to repeat and refine is part of what makes them serial. No single act fully satisfies the psychological need, driving them to repeat the behavior. Another key psychological feature is the need for power and control. For many serial killers, the act of taking a life represents the ultimate expression of dominance over another human being. This drive often connects to profound feelings of powerlessness or humiliation in their own lives. The crimes become a way of asserting control in a world where they feel fundamentally powerless. This is why many serial killers also engage in extended domination behaviors, holding victims captive, engaging in prolonged psychological torture, or taking trophies to relive the experience afterward. The psychological typology of serial killers was famously categorized by the FBI into 4 motivational categories: power and control seekers, hedonistic killers motivated by pleasure or financial gain, mission-oriented killers who believe they are ridding the world of a certain type of person, and visionary killers who act on delusional beliefs or hallucinations. While this framework has been refined over the decades, it remains useful for understanding the diverse motivations behind serial murder. What is perhaps most chilling is how effectively many serial killers can mask their true nature. The concept of the mask of sanity, developed by psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley, describes how psychopathic individuals can present a convincing facade of normality while harboring deeply disturbed inner lives. This ability to appear completely normal, even charming and likable, is what makes serial killers so dangerous and so difficult to identify before they strike. The investigation of serial killers has driven some of the most significant advances in criminal investigation methodology. The challenges these cases present are unique. Crimes spread across time and geography, victims often with no obvious connection to their killer, and offenders specifically chosen for their ability to blend into society. One of the most significant developments in responding to serial crime has been criminal profiling, also known as offender profiling. Pioneered by FBI agents like John Douglas and Robert Ressler in the 1970s and 80s, profiling uses behavioral analysis of crime scenes to draw inferences about an unknown offender's characteristics, their likely age, occupation, social background, and psychological profile. While profiling has its limitations and critics, it has proven valuable in narrowing the suspect pool and focusing investigative resources in complex cases. Modern profiling has evolved significantly from its early days. Today's behavioral analysts use statistical databases of known offenders, sophisticated psychological frameworks, and rigorous research methodologies to develop profiles that are more empirically grounded than the early intuitive approaches. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit represents the gold standard of this work, though similar units now exist in law enforcement agencies worldwide. Technology has transformed serial killer investigations in profound ways. DNA analysis, introduced into criminal investigations in the 1980s, revolutionized the ability to link crimes to a single offender with scientific certainty. The development of national DNA databases has allowed investigators to connect crimes across jurisdictions and even solve cold cases decades after they were committed. Unlike individual homicides, where investigators can focus on people connected to the victim, serial cases often involve strangers with no obvious connection, making traditional investigative approaches less effective. Historically, one of the greatest challenges was simply recognizing that a series of murders were connected. Before modern communication systems and databases, murders in different jurisdictions might never be linked, allowing serial offenders to continue undetected for years or even decades. This problem, known as linkage blindness, meant each murder was investigated as an isolated incident, preventing investigators from seeing larger patterns that might point toward a serial offender. The development of centralized databases and information sharing systems has been revolutionary. Modern investigators can search for similar crimes across jurisdictions, identifying potential series based on victim characteristics, killing methods, or other behavioral signatures. DNA databases have been particularly transformative, allowing investigators to definitively link crimes through biological evidence even when no suspect has been identified. These technological advances have dramatically shortened the time serial offenders can operate undetected. Forensic science has also evolved in response to serial crime investigations. Beyond DNA analysis, modern investigators employ geographic profiling to identify likely areas where offenders live or work, psychological profiling to predict offender characteristics, and sophisticated crime scene analysis to extract maximum information from physical evidence. The integration of these diverse techniques creates a comprehensive investigative approach more effective than any single method alone. However, catching serial killers still requires something technology cannot replace: investigative instinct and dedication. Many serial cases are solved through meticulous traditional police work, interviews, surveillance, and following up on tips from the public. The most successful investigations typically combine modern forensic techniques with thorough traditional investigation, each approach compensating for the other's limitations. The role of public awareness and cooperation cannot be overstated. Many serial killers are ultimately caught because someone recognizes patterns of behavior, reports suspicious activity, or comes forward with information. Creating systems that encourage public vigilance while avoiding panic is a delicate balance investigators must strike. Too little public information allows offenders to continue undetected. Too much can create panic, generate false leads, or even inspire copycat behavior. One of the most difficult aspects of serial investigations is knowing when to stop. Some cases go cold despite exhaustive investigation, leaving investigators with the painful knowledge that an offender remains free. However, modern cold case units equipped with new technologies have successfully solved serial cases decades old, bringing closure to families and justice to victims. These successes demonstrate that persistence and evolving investigative techniques can overcome even the most challenging cases. Here is what you need to remember. First, serial killers are defined as individuals who murder 3 or more people over time with cooling-off periods between crimes. Second, they are not born but made through a combination of biological vulnerabilities, childhood trauma, and environmental factors. Third, neurological abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex and amygdala can impair empathy and impulse control. Fourth, organized killers plan meticulously while disorganized killers act impulsively, with most falling on a spectrum between these types. Fifth, modern investigative techniques, including DNA analysis, criminal profiling, and database systems have dramatically improved the ability to identify and capture serial offenders. The human mind is capable of remarkable things: extraordinary creativity, deep compassion, and incredible achievement. But it is also capable of terrible darkness. Understanding both possibilities makes us more complete in our knowledge of human nature and better equipped to nurture the positive while preventing the destructive. That is the true value of studying the psychology of the serial killer. Not morbid fascination, but practical wisdom that makes our society safer and our understanding more complete. If this exploration of the human psyche left you with questions, share your thoughts below. And if you want to continue uncovering the hidden patterns that shape human behavior, the next investigation is already waiting. The truth is out there, but someone has to dig for it.